what he needs to face up to pretty quickly is the reality of the situation that Britain already spends too much, borrows too much, and also face up to the reality that Britain is not competing enough in a whole swathe of areas. That's unfortunately the situation. It's not a political point, it's an economic reality point.
Let's give a bit of thought to what we can expect from Andy Burnham on the economy. In that speech he made today, he said that the government could not control inflation effectively without greater public control over essential services, promising to set the country on a new economic path. He talked about the era of privatisation in the 1980s. He was not happy about that. He said that Britain had surrendered control of essentials such as housing, water, energy and transport. He has previously promised to stick to Labour's pledge of avoiding income tax, VAT or national insurance on employees. But he has said there is some room within the manifesto for tax changes. He has also promised to stick to Labour's fiscal rules. Well, let's now discuss this with two well-respected economists. Welcome to the show, Gerard Lyons. Gerard is Chief Economist at Netwealth and a Research Fellow at the Centre for Political Studies. Hello, Gerard.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon and welcome to the show, Dr. Alex Chapman. Alex is Head of Economics at the New Economics Foundation, which is a think tank which is quite closely associated to quite a few people close to Andy Burnham, namely Miatta Fan-Bullah, who used to be their Chief Executive. Alex, welcome.
Hi, good afternoon.
So look, Gerard, I'm going to start with you. From what you have, I mean, we haven't got a lot of flesh on the bone yet, but from what you've picked up, what do you think, what's the direction of travel you envisage for Andy Burnham and do you agree with it?
Well, Burnham faces two competing forces. One is his political allies, his backbenchers, maybe some Labour supporters, and that points to more public spending, increased borrowing, probably even more taxation. And against that is economic and fiscal reality, and in particular the bond markets. I think Burnham will basically have to face up to the reality. That might well influence his choice of Chancellor, given what's been said in recent days, but we'll have to wait and see. So I think he needs to win over the markets and he needs to tread very carefully. But ultimately, in terms of what he has said politically, it points to more public spending, more tax, more borrowing. And it also points to more regulation, more intervention, and maybe nationalisation. His speech today and his comments in recent weeks have been very backward-looking. They're sort of very back to the 70s, back to the 80s. Look, we're in 2026. Britain needs to face up to the fact it needs to be internationally competitive. Large parts of the UK economy do pretty well. We're doing well in AI. We're doing well in the city. We're doing well in terms of different aspects of the university education sector. But against that, we have a huge cost of living crisis that needs to be addressed, and the Bank of England needs to keep inflation under control. But ultimately, just to conclude, the real problem is that public spending is already far too high. Public spending used to be 35 to 40% of the size of the economy. Even before Andy Burnham comes in, it's gone through 45%, heading up to 47%. So Britain is already living beyond its means and is not competitive. And to actually become more competitive and live within his means, he's going to have to, I think, upset many of his political supporters.
Thanks for that, Gerard. Look, Alex, Gerard feels that from what he's heard from Andy Burnham so far, it feels like it's going back to the 1970s. What would you say to that?
I mean, I'm not too sure about that. I think I would say it's more a question of learning from what's happened since the 1970s, which has obviously been the mass sell-off of public assets, a failure to invest in those assets, and of course, in the end, a pass-through of costs onto bills. You know, we see things like the privatisation of the energy, water networks, and others driving up bills for consumers. And from what I've heard is that we're breaking with that mantra, that sort of market-first mantra that has led us down the garden path. And you know, I think it's not going to be easy to address those fundamental problems in the economy that have accumulated over 40 years. But we've got to stop sidestepping the question. It is time to take bold action and to deal with that.
And Alex, you know, one of the biggest pressures is on the economy, and everybody wants there to be more growth. How do you think an Andy Burnham government will seek to get that elusive growth, Alex?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting framing because I'm not sure that the sort of people of Britain are screaming out for growth. I think the people of Britain are asking for functioning public services and a cost of living that they can afford.
But growth helps
Um,
that, doesn't it?
well, it does, but depends, right? I mean, certain types of growth do, and other types of growth don't. If the growth is in the pockets of, foreign private equity shareholders, then it doesn't necessarily benefit the people of
So are you
Britain.
saying so? Are you saying that Andy Burnham shouldn't be focusing on growth?
I'm saying that growth is a byproduct of potentially good steering of the economy, but it's not the objective here. The objective is to deliver good living standards for people, and yes, growth can be part of
So
that.
how does he do that?
Well, by starting with the cost of living and the everyday challenges facing the people. I mean, if ultimately, if people can't afford to get to work, then they can't do good work. So, that's why you might
Sure.
look at
I totally
reducing
agree.
the cost of
So how
bus
do,
travel, for
so,
example.
and how does he, like, when you say, I mean, absolutely get that the pressures are huge, but let's see, how does he actually practically do that in terms of reducing energy bills, reducing transport bills, reducing food prices? How does he actually do that?
Well, the very immediate short term, he needs to implement policies that bring down those costs. So, that would be, reducing the bus fare cap, implementing an essential energy guarantee so that essential energy needs are met. I think what you're actually asking is how do you pay for that?
Yeah.
And yes, in the short term, probably the answer is that you need to do some tax rises. And despite the sort of framing that there's no sort of space for that, it's misleading. The UK is relatively middle of the pack when it comes to the size of our tax burden in the whole economy relative to many of our European peers. There is plenty of room to slightly open up the envelope to spend a little more to deal with a short-term crisis.
And given that he's not going to touch the big three, where do you think those tax rises should come from, Alex?
Well, there's a range of different options. I think the principal one that we are going to see talk about is the issue about how you deal with wealth, or particularly, I think, more likely income from wealth. There's going to be a focus on capital gains and why we offer lower tax rates on capital gains than we do on ordinary income, and addressing some of those kind of disparities in the system. And there's also areas you can look at around the sort of taxing the activities in our economy that are not contributing to the economy. So that's why we've heard talk about tax on online retail, warehousing, and reforms to business rates that might ask places like Amazon to contribute a bit more. That's taxing the kind of industries that actually are not bringing a huge amount of value, that are not necessarily making our high streets places that people want to be.
Right. So Gerard, that's interesting hearing that from Alex. More tax rises to help people with the cost of living. What's your reaction to that?
You know what? It is really quite depressing if this is the level of economic debate even before Andy Burnham has faced up to economic and fiscal and financial reality. Western Europe is the slow growth region of the world economy. We need to, in Britain, start comparing ourselves with the strong, fast-growing regions of the world. That does include America, although they face challenges. It includes lots of East Asia. It includes China as well. We need to invest. Why is it that public and private investment is so low? Why is it that Britain is a low growth, low wage, low productivity economy? It's not because taxes aren't high enough. Britain has grown faster than Germany, Italy, France in recent years. Western Europe is the slow growth region of the world, as I say. You need to actually compare yourself with the regions that are doing well, and you need to actually look at which parts of the UK economy actually are looking pretty good. AI, as I said earlier, business, financial services, the service sector more generally. Certainly you need to address the cost of living. We need to have a debate about immigration. No one talks about immigration in this debate. We need to talk about the lack of housing in this debate. But you don't get that by the government stepping in and providing what it thinks is the answer, which is to increase public spending. Remember, public spending, we have had a mixed economy since the Second World War. In the UK, people accept the mixed economy works well. The public sector plays an important role. The private sector plays a critical role. But the private sector is the role and the area that you really need to be energising now. When public spending is already far higher than levels that people used to think were acceptable, then you have to be concerned if we're actually going to increase it even further. Britain, on current trends, is heading for a debt crisis. And that's before you actually start to spend even more money. Now, we do need to address the cost of living crisis. Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. But you need to have sensible answers to that. That's not more price setting, wage and price policies. This has failed before. You need to be energising, encouraging small, medium-sized firms. No one has talked about the SME sector. The SME sector, small, medium-sized enterprises, are the backbone of the economy. The economy is to do well. That sector needs to be energised. It's not energised by even more regulation and more taxes. So what I'm really concerned about is that Burnham seems to be playing to his political audience at the moment, think tanks on the left, Labour MPs. But what he needs to face up to pretty quickly is the reality of the situation that Britain already spends too much, borrows too much, and also face up to the reality that Britain is not competing enough in a whole swathe of areas. That's unfortunately the situation. It's not a political point, it's an economic reality point.
Well, look, Gerard and Alex, thank you very much for your time. Very interesting discussion. Paul says, here we go again, more tax and spend from Labour without any proper sort of growth plan. Where are the details of how Andy intends to create the jobs? Brendan says the left-leaning Economist is terrifying. If these are the policies Andy Burnham will be pursuing, then we are in real trouble and heading for a meeting with the IMF. And Tom says, why do we want to be more like Europe? Their economy is declining. Right, keep your comments coming in. We're going to carry on after the news with more sort of economic discussion, slightly more politically tilted. We're going to talk about that crucial relationship between number 10 and the Treasury number 11, because that relationship is germane in terms of sorting out the economy, and the economy is at the heart of a lot of this country's woes.